Thank you for the introduction, Eva, and good afternoon and good morning to our listeners. I welcome the opportunity to chat with you today and take you through last quarter's events, that being the third quarter. I suspect there'll be a number of questions in relation to our refinancing and our current position of voluntary suspension. So I'll try and run through the presentation reasonably quickly, and then we can focus on those questions, which I would be very, very happy to answer to my fullest ability. So if we could just move to page 2, please, Eva.
Yes, again now.
So the agenda for today will be informally the highlights, and then of course we'll move on to the commercialization schedule, corporate and financial events, research and development, manufacturing and collaborations, and conclude with financials. So just to touch on the highlights for the quarter, at least the ones that I'm able to share with you. We're very pleased to report our progress at the Technical Advisory Board level, and we achieved a 12% maximum power point performance for gold-free PIN modules. We received yet another Horizon 2020 project grant for the project known as Spearhead of 500,000 euros, which is equivalent to approximately 800,000 Australian dollars. We established a new R&D rebate facility with CVA Bank, who is increasingly our lead banker, for $4 million, which has been very helpful in the current circumstances. Very good progress on the IP front with a very exciting new patent lodged provisionally for a solution-based carbon conductor. We're also happy to report that our strategic international negotiations for funding our prototype project are near completion, and our discussions with ASX indicate that as soon as that is complete, we will be able to list the shares once again. So I'll move on to a little more detail. If we could move to page 5, just briefly.
Yes, page 5.
So as you are both aware, as you are all aware, in relation to our commercialization schedule, we run a schedule for both glass and metal, and the essential stages of that schedule are prototyping, pilot line, and then mass production in both glass and metal. The glass project leads metal, although that is potentially subject to revision because the metals project has been advancing very quickly. And of course there has been, as you will be aware, because of the current project refinancing hurdle, some delays to the glass project, but certainly not in years but in months. And when we are fully aware of the extent of those, we'll be able to announce revisions to both glass and metal commercialization schedules. But we're not in a position to really do that yet because we need to get some certainty around obviously the equipment orders, fit out and commissioning of the new facility at Clayton in Melbourne, which will obviously be subject to some uncertainty given the fact that most of that will be outsourced to external equipment and fit out services. So we'll keep our shareholders informed as that information comes to hand. Moving on to corporate and financial, so to page 7.
Yes, page 7.
So prior to questions, we can just touch on voluntary suspension. So voluntary suspension is something which is available to companies who don't wish their shares to trade on an uninformed basis. So it's not uncommon for a company to request voluntary suspension, particularly during a protracted negotiation. And this is definitely the situation we have been in relation to funding the glass prototype facility for the development of the MAD prototype. So it has perhaps extended a little longer than we first anticipated, but it is nearing conclusion, and we do believe that during that time it has been in the interest of shareholders to enjoy the protection of being unlisted, and particularly in relation to our negotiation position with new investors. So new investors have invariably accepted current valuations, if not higher valuations, based on the potential for any incoming capital to be matched by a significant amount of government grants. So, for example, should we raise $10 million in this round at an attractive price, with the additional matching at a multiple of at least 1.5 times, generating a total investment amount of $25 million, then I believe we'll be in a very strong position in our treasury and a very strong position for the benefit of our shareholders. So we're not unhappy to have taken advantage of this ASX mechanism, and we're working ourselves a way through it very successfully. And as we said in the actual announcement, a re-trading of our shares is imminent, and as soon as we're in the position to do that, we'll instruct the ASX to begin quoting our shares once more, with the benefit, of course, of having a fully funded MAD project, and I believe funding at least to the end of calendar year 2019, if not further. In fact, some of the studies we have done about the ability to manage our new finances with new equity, government matching through ARENA, R&D rebates, and of course the CVA equipment leasing facility, which we're negotiating, means that for every dollar of new equity we raise, we will have more than $2 of new non-dilutionary equity available for the benefit of developing our projects. So at the moment I'm being conservative and suggesting it is around $25 million, but it may be as much as $30 million, which will take us beyond calendar year 19, and of course give us the chance to complete the manufacture of our major area demonstration prototype, as well as conduct the all-important accreditation tests, which will launch this technology onto the world stage as a genuine contender to compete with existing first and second generation technology. So that's pretty exciting for us. I think what we've established during this negotiation period is that we have significant interest from international investors, many of them closely aligned with international government. So countries that have not had the benefit of a strong solar industry at the R&D level are particularly interested, particularly when their energy dynamics demand some internal capability. They're the ones that we seem to be attracting. Locally it's been a little less exciting, because there's no doubt in Australia, for example, we're still fighting at times some of the long-term entrenched reluctance by government, particularly at the federal level, to very significantly support Australian industry. As we all know, there is a very almost cliched understanding of Australian technology, that being that Australians are very inventive but don't necessarily always enjoy the benefit commercially of that invention. So we fought that hard, and of course there are some exceptions to that, and we have enjoyed support from the Department of Industry with our CRCP grant, and of course ARENA with our $6 million ARENA grant. So we're an international company. We enjoy some very interesting relationships. We've brought government and international corporate interest around the table, and we're now very comfortable about the way to move forward. States in Australia have improved quite considerably in the last 12 months in terms of their ability to support projects like this, so we're still very confident of getting some benefit from the state governments in terms of relocation from Queanbeyan into state capitals. I don't want to go into any more detail other than that's reasonably advanced, and it should be in excess of $1 million additional support. So the amount of non-dilutionary funding that's slowly evolving for us is good, but we always need to match it with our own internal funds, given the conditionality of a lot of that that type of government support. Just completing the corporate and financial section, it's been very gratifying to see our lead banker now, the CVA Bank, being very supportive. So they've supported us last financial year and have again provided us with a facility of up to $4 million for R&D rebate advances. So they've been extremely helpful in doing that, and very flexible in meeting our particular needs in terms of drawing down on that facility. In addition to that R&D rebate facility, we're now in advanced discussions for sign-off on a equipment leasing facility for up to sort of $7 to $10 million worth of equipment over time. Certainly a minimum of $7 million worth of equipment for the new prototype facility. So it's very pleasing. I guess it goes against the conventional understanding of the role of banks in this country, but they've been exceptional in their support. So we'd certainly like that to be known. That CVA are really giving us a lot of good support. So let's move forward, please, to research and development.
Yes, page 9.
So we move on to page 9. So as I said, we've been developing in the third generation of perovskite solar cells a minimum of 2 principal technologies or architectures, being a subset of the technology, one being porous carbon, the other one being PIN. And the PIN architecture has certainly come to the fore during our time at Soliance. One of the great benefits of that is that it's not only robust but has relatively high industrial efficiencies, and has been very responsive to our touch, which has typically been the removal of organic materials, replacing them with inorganic materials, replacing more expensive materials with cheaper materials, and so forth. So it's quite a versatile and robust architecture. And at our minimum industrial scale now, at the module level, we're getting a very robust 12% maximum power point tracking, which is robust. A lot of academics don't use this more robust testing protocol, and that IV scanning, which is typically used in the academic community, sometimes overstates power performance of modules. So our 12% at industrial level for an industrial scale module is very robust. An academic, on the other hand, might report that as something as high as 14 or 15% using a different methodology. So we're very pleased about that, and that's been translating performances from the previous quarter at the cell level now into a module level, and it looks most likely that this technology will be the one that we take into the MAD prototyping. So quite excited about that. I note also in parallel at Alliance, where this technology or a similar expression of this technology is used, that Alliance have been able to get modular performance as high as 14.5%. I will say, however, that we're not really comparing apples with apples in this regard, because some of the materials used by Alliance still have a certain academic type nature, meaning they're not necessarily inorganic or cheap. So again, our 12% is a strong number relative to some of the more academic numbers that are being generated. Anyway, it's all good news for the technology, and you know, you'll note with us and with Alliance each quarter we've been able to improve on efficiencies, improve on scale. So we feel very, very comfortable about moving into the prototyping stage, where we'll now operate at a much, much larger scale, that being 600 millimeters by 1200 millimeters, which is the size of the major area demonstration prototype. We continue to do very well in Europe in particular, on an ongoing basis for accumulating further grant support. So if I can take you back, last year we were very lucky to enjoy the support of over $1 million of new funding under the GOT Solar project, which was essentially around sealing and encapsulation of large-scale panels. Earlier this year, we received 500,000 euros, or the equivalent of $800,000, under what is known as the Apollo project. And then in the last quarter, we've received the same amount of money through the Spearhead project. Spearhead is a project where we are one of the lead technology enablers, and it's part of the much larger 150 million euro graphene project, or a subset of that. So if you accumulate those three EU-denominated or Euro-denominated projects over the last 18 months, we've attracted an additional 2.5 to 3 million Australian dollars worth of non-dilutionary support. Most of this money goes into our Flexibles project, which, as you know, is centred at Alliance, but also overseen out of Manchester. So that's pretty exciting, and that's attracting ongoing corporate interest as well. And all of the activities, fortunately, that those projects are focused on are activities which we would otherwise have to fund ourselves. So there's nothing esoteric about them. Sealing and encapsulation, scaling, roll-to-roll processing, these sorts of critical steps for developing a metals project, particularly for building integrated photovoltaics, are something very critical to the progress of and upscale and commercialization of this technology. And finally, in relation to R&D, had a really good breakthrough here. most of you will be familiar with conventional conductors being gold, silver and copper with low levels of resistivity. But they are all relatively expensive, particularly gold and silver. So for some 12 months or so we've been working in Lausanne with our SWAT team to develop an alternative conductor, and in this context we've developed a carbon-based conductor which is demonstrating high performance. And just as importantly, this carbon-based conductor is solution processed. Just to take a more general understanding of the industrial processes that we have adopted for the manufacture of these modules and panels, we steer well clear of anything which involves high pressure or, for that matter, vacuum, and something that is able to be coated typically through the use of solvents at room temperature. So solution-based processing is the essential process we use for applying all our various photoactive layers, and this invention will allow us to continue to do that with a low-cost carbon back contact. So these days we don't typically talk about cathodes and anodes, but a contact is essentially an electrode, and the language these days is more around talking about N-type and P-type materials. But essentially this back contact has shown us sufficient promise to justify protecting the intellectual property we have created here with a patent. So we're very excited about that. Moving on to manufacturing and collaborations.
Yes, page 11.
That's page 11.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not at liberty to discuss the detail around the manufacturing collaboration or manufacturing project or that will come out of this current round of investing, but it's an international project based at the national level, and when the financing, international financing is complete, then we'll be able to give a lot more detail around our mass manufacturing plans internationally. For those of you who are familiar with our manufacturing plans, we've always concentrated on developing manufacturing capability here in Australia, but more importantly, the development of a value-added prototyping facility which will be available not only for the first generations of this technology, but for next generation technology. So that will definitely be the role of the facility that we're establishing in Clayton with CSIRO. Internationally, it's a little less clear because ultimately at very large scale, one needs to enjoy the benefits of cheap per unit manufacturing, which countries like China, for example, and Turkey, as another example, are quite famous for because of the low cost of manufacture, the low cost of capital equipment, and reasonably low labour costs. So it's fair to say that the discussions we've been having in the last 6 to 8 weeks have had prospective international manufacturers involved, and we are just biting those off one by one. So we hope to bed the first one down in the next week or so, and then put out quite a significant announcement with plenty of detail around that. Most importantly, it will be backed by investment, so you will have the confidence as a GSL investor knowing that we can move forward with a funded project for manufacture. And of course, when that's bedded down, we'd like to consider other potential international partnerships as well. And we have one or two of those also in the queue. So it is, subject to bedding down the current investment. Exciting times forward for our investors. Finally, on the financials, on page 13.
Yes, page 13.
We have we have a relatively low cash position at the moment, as you would all be aware, but with the benefit of our CVA R&D rebate facility and so forth, our current position has not inhibited our ability to move forward and to pursue our technology development plans and also our business development plans. So as I said earlier, the real issue about refinancing is the significant capital required to fund our prototype facility, which at the minimum is around $3 million worth of fit-out expenses and another $7 million of capital expenditure. And without that in the bank, we weren't confident to progress with that project. And when the money does arrive, then we'll be fully funded to move forward, not only to fund the project, but also operationally for at least the next 18, if not 24 months. So I thank everyone for their patience. I believe the decisions that we've made have been in the best interests of shareholders, such that when these plans come to fruition, we'll enjoy a very strong pathway moving forward and and prospective. So listen, that's all I've got to say formally today, but I'm sure there are plenty of questions, so I would certainly welcome any question to put any of your concerns to rest.
So thanks a lot, Richard. Vielen Dank. You have now the possibility to ask questions. Sie haben jetzt die Möglichkeit, Fragen zu stellen. You can use either the chat function, which you find below the presentation. Sie können also entweder die Chat-Funktion nutzen, die sich unterhalb der Präsentation befindet, or you can send me an email. You find the email here on this presentation. The email is e.reuter@dr. Sie können mir also auch alternativ eine E-Mail schicken, die Sie hier auf der Präsentation sehen, e.reuter@dr-reuter.eu. Wir haben auch bereits die ersten Fragen. We already have the first questions coming in. Die erste Frage ist, the first question is Mr. Caldwell. What's your personal opinion about Oxford PV and their technology?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please, in English?
What is your personal opinion about Oxford PV and their technology?
How do you spell that? I'm familiar with most of my potential competitors.
Oxford, the English.
Oh, Oxford. Sorry. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so Oxford is an obvious competitor, potential competitor of ours. We don't use exactly the same technology. And both parties, I would believe, would claim that they have freedom to operate. The key difference between Oxford and Great Cell Solar is one of investment in time and money. So we have invested in excess of 900 person years in the development of this technology, most of which has focused on the scale-up of the technology, which includes, as I've said, and I'll avoid being too repetitive, but things like working on larger devices, substitution of inorganic materials for substitution with inorganics for organics, sealing and encapsulation, and of course a lot of testing in and around the accreditation standard, which is IEC 61215. My understanding of Oxford is that it's a significantly smaller operation. It is less well funded. It is more academic. And I would be very surprised if they have invested even as much as 20% of the time and the money that we have invested in developing the technology. So I would consider that we are significantly further advanced than Oxford. I am aware that Oxford have acquired some prototyping assets, I think in Germany, but since that has been announced, we have heard no news in relation to any of their accreditation work. So I would think that despite the acquisition of these redundant assets used previously in an OPV context, they are certainly not ready for upscaling their technology and taking it through to mass manufacture. I don't know exactly what that difference is, but I would suggest that we are conservatively 3 years advanced on Oxford photovoltaics. It's a very big and emerging field, so we consider more important to one's IP position, one's relationship commercially, particularly with corporations and governments, and there is absolutely no competitor who has the relationships that Great Cell Solar has internationally with government, meaning we have strong relationships in the EU, we have strong relationships in Korea, we have strong relationships here in Australia, and we have an emerging strong relationship in Turkey. And these, we think, are very strong barriers to entry beyond the intellectual property position that we enjoy.
Okay, thanks so much. The next question would be, what do you think about a collaboration with Frontier Energy Solution?
Frontier Energy. Now, I believe they are a fairly small Korean operation with Professors Park and Professors Suk as two of the leading academics in that small corporation. We're not aware of them having a significant amount of intellectual property. We're not aware of them having freedom to operate. We're not aware of Frontier having significant access to capital to actually develop their academic position into large-scale devices through prototyping. Of course, we have respect for both of those academics, and we have relationships with them. As you know, we have a Korean office, in fact, and have been serving the Korean academic community with our materials and equipment for probably 10 years. So I would think we would be very receptive if Frontier develops technology which we consider would enhance our product offering, but we certainly don't consider them as a competitive threat at this stage. We see them far more academic as opposed to commercial.
Thanks so much. And the next question is regarding the 18-19 budget. And the question is, the budget that was delivered yesterday included changes to the R&D rebate. Will Great Cell be impacted by these changes, and if so, how?
I am, to be perfectly honest, I haven't looked at yesterday's budget to that level of detail. I have been aware from time to time that there have been minor changes to the R&D rebate. For example, it was lowered from 45 cents in the dollar to 43.5 cents in the dollar 2 or 3 budgets ago. But I'm not aware of the impact of this budget. I did look at the budget. I haven't read the budget papers yet. And of course, any significant change to the R&D rebate that was negative would impact us because we do rely on that. So I will probably take that question offline before I say anything more, do some further investigation and then report back to you through one of the forums that our investors typically look at. But I can say that most of these sorts of budgetary changes are typically not immediate, so it would be unlikely that will have an impact today, but would probably be introduced at a later date. So I think our own cash flow projections and budgetary projections for the next 12 months would be unaffected by changes in that respect. But anyway, let me take that on notice, and I'll report back via you if I could, Eva.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. The next question would be, would it be better to cooperate with the Chinese or the Turks? Maybe both of them.
Well, I think as an aspiring disruptive technology enablement company on the world scene, that we would like to collaborate with as many potential commercial partners as possible. I don't see those two particular countries being necessarily in conflict. I think the Turkish market and the Chinese markets both have strong internal attributes domestically. Both of them have strong economic and environmental policies supporting the uptake of new technology and also supporting emissions reduction. So with relatively low levels of PV penetration. So I think it would be possible that we could establish collaborations with commercial partners in both of those countries without creating any problem for ourselves. And in fact, that is something that we certainly are entertaining at the moment. And hopefully over the year we will get further developments on both of those markets. We also have quite good relationships with the governments in both of those countries, particularly the Turkish government. So I don't think there's an unlimited potential for partners, but I think partners in China, Turkey, possibly the USA would offer product for market where we would see relatively low levels of conflict, and it's something that we're working on.
Thanks. And a further question regarding partnerships regarding commercialization with you partner with Tata Steel and CSR building products. How exactly does this partnership look like? What are the concrete steps?
That's a very good question, and thanks for bringing those topics up. So in relation to Tata Steel, as many of you will be aware, Tata Steel UK has been a partner of our company since 2008. The reason that that particular partnership has not progressed significantly in the last 5 years is because of the economic problems experienced by Tata Steel UK, where essentially they have suffered because of uncompetitive steel manufacturing technology and clearly uncompetitive pricing. That particular company is now in the advanced stages of merging with ThyssenKrupp in Europe to build what we would hope would be a much stronger and robust steel manufacturing capability in the UK and Europe, and of course hopefully enjoying significant synergies through the merger process. So we still have an ongoing dialogue with them, and I think when the merger process is completed, then we'll be back to having productive discussions for the incorporation of our technology into their steel products. The benefit for us in the meantime has been that we have moved out of an exclusive relationship into a non-exclusive relationship, and in that time during their recovery, we have had the opportunity to speak with other global steel producers. So there is some competitive tension building about who we will ultimately partner with. For example, at the moment we are in discussions with alternative large steel companies through our collaboration at Alliance for the incorporation of our technology into their steel products as well. So we haven't signed any contracts, but would certainly encourage some competition amongst the major steel producers to adopt our technology. And one of the mistakes we made earlier was to go too soon into an exclusive relationship. So while we remain non-exclusive, we're in the position to negotiate a stronger outcome, and we're certainly on track to progress that according to the commercialization schedule that we touched on earlier on in this presentation. In relation to CSR, CSR are a relatively small global producer, but in Australian terms one of the larger building materials company. They do have the advantage of having bought the Pilkington glass assets from Pilkington, who were formerly present in Australia. So those assets some time ago were purchased for around $1 billion, and Pilkington remains the only float line producer of glass in Australia. So they make an excellent partner. They will be involved in the prototyping work that we undertake in a minor way through what is known as the CRCP grant. So the CRCP grant helped fund technology which would allow us to improve our deposition techniques onto larger glass surfaces. So CSIRO, CSR and Great Cell Solar are all coming together to work towards that outcome. So it's at this stage a fairly low-key collaboration, but should we be successful in our prototyping operations, I'm sure there is a role for us to work more closely with CSR, both for the provision of ITO glass, which is one of the key inputs for the manufacture of glass panels, but also potentially to access CSR's considerable local and international distribution channels. We've had chats with them on all of these subjects, but nothing will be completed until we complete our prototype project.
Okay. Then I have two questions regarding the commercialization. The first question is, building integrated photovoltaic is the holy grail for PV. What is the realistic commercialization plan? And the second question would be, could you give us an update in relation to general commercialization projects in Korea, China, Turkey and Australia?
Sure. Well, I think I've touched on the second one already, but I can certainly touch on BIPV. So yes, I agree with you that BIPV is the holy grail, which is why we have invested particularly in our flexibles project at Soliance, because metal roofing in particular is an appropriate substrate for the incorporation of our technology. Just to take you back to the Tata project, over £13 million was spent on proving up the technology for incorporation into steel roofing produced through the roll-to-roll processes used in the manufacture of steel roofing. So coil-coated steel is effectively transformed into colour coat and colour bond for the use particularly in industrial warehousing, which is a very, very big market. In fact, the project that we developed with Tata Steel before Tata Steel's economic issues projected as much as 40 million square metres of roofing product a year. Now that's certainly product at the scale of multi-billion-dollar annual production. So that prospect remains on the table, and it is very suited for the incorporation, this technology, into roofing steel and roll-to-roll processing. And that's part of the technology which is also being proven up at Soliance. So the Tata Steel project was a forerunner to what's being done at Soliance at the moment, and it's the key focus of that technology and that collaboration. So we're very excited about that. We don't see any credible competition. What is most important in developing any PV product is to be competitive at the levelized cost of electricity metric, and also to have a technology which is very scalable into mass manufacturing processes. Most of the early stage BIPV products that we have witnessed in the market are low scale and inefficient and have no credible performance attributes, meaning they're typically unwarranted, or if they are warranted, they're not warranted to a performance level which is competitive with alternative renewable energy or with existing fossil fuels. So we have a very ambitious development plan, and we want to produce a product that is competitive with all alternative energy sources and is long life. And while that may be taking longer than perhaps some early stage competitive products, it's far more scalable, and we believe will ultimately translate into a much, much more significant profit for our shareholders. The other challenge, of course, in BIPV is to make sure that you can produce a product which has been tested and put through all the hoops of IEC 61215 accreditation, ultimately translating, we believe, into a product with a life of 20 years or more, because to be competitive with silicon PV or cadmium telluride PV, we need to be able to provide a similar level of warranty. So while we'd like to rush into that, I think there's a credible amount of risk management that needs to be undertaken, which includes not only developing a good product, but also includes working closely with all the regulatory authorities that oversee the building products market. And that ranges from anything to understanding fire risk issues, toxicity of materials, maintenance standards. All these things are now highly regulated, and we'll be working closely with authorities to ensure that the products that we produce are able to be used in any reasonable building context throughout our potential marketplace. And that will take some time, but it's good investment to ensure that we have a very long-term viable product. Of course, that will be also underpinned by a multi-generational development plan where each year we seek to introduce higher efficiencies and longer life products to sustain a long-term revenue stream for the company and our partners.
Okay, thanks so much. Further questions regarding potential collaborations, and I will with two questions. The first is, what do you think about a collaboration with the Russian energy company EN+? They are developing perovskite solar cells together with the Lomonosov University and the EPFL. And the next question would be a collaboration with the Australian company BlueScope Steel.
Well, let me address the Russians first. I would question any Russian company to enter this field with a strong intellectual property position. So I'm not aware of any Russian entity having the rights to technology developed under the core patents of the EPFL. So the EPFL have additional partners, but typically those partners are unlicensed partners who are working only at the R&D level and do not have any intellectual property rights to or freedom to operate as a mass manufacturer. Obviously we'd need to watch that on an ongoing basis. In relation to BlueScope Steel, the company has a long historic relationship, so we have from time to time had good discussions with BlueScope Steel for the introduction of both disolar cells and perovskite solar cells for incorporation into their technology or into their roofing products. It's also fair to say that there are relationships between some of the world's largest steel manufacturers for licensing or cross-licensing technology. So, for example, Tata Steel and BlueScope Steel cross-license technology. So, any technology that could be introduced through the Tata Thyssen entity could easily be ultimately licensed out to BlueScope Steel. These sorts of conversations have been had in the past, and I think are likely to happen in the future. One of the problems with progressing our negotiations with BlueScope Steel has been very similar to some of the problems that that Tata have endured, being that most steel companies over the last 5 to 10 years have had significant problems in and around profitability, and they've also had to wind back a lot of their R&D and product development, and most of them have gone back to core activities. And it's only in about the last 12 months that we've seen these steel companies once again looking at value-added products like solar-enabled steel. So, you know, there's a very interesting market once again emerging, and we've identified the partners that are most attractive to us, and those will become more apparent, I guess, over the next few months when we get an opportunity to make some announcements around early stage collaboration.
Okay, and maybe due to the time, the last question. Thank you for your clear presentation. Apart from current refinancing, what do you consider to be the greatest risks at present?
Oh, I think undoubtedly the biggest risk for us is the scaling of the technology, which is why we're focusing on it so clearly and closely, and while we're really dedicating our resources to a very well managed scale-up process. Just to remind you, we haven't discussed VDL Enabling Technologies Group tonight, but VDL remains our consultant for both developing prototypes, but beyond that for pilot line and mass manufacture. So we'll always work very carefully with VDL Enabling Technology Group to make sure that we use the best technology, that we understand all the risks involved in scaling the technology, and of course ultimately that should translate into high volume product at low unit cost. So we recognise that our company is a very, very clever company with very well educated chemists, scientists and engineers, but we don't have a lot of experience in mass manufacture, so we see that relationship as something to focus on, and also something to find high quality complementary partners. So scale up is something we're focusing on at the moment. It will occupy the next 6 to 12 months in glass and the next 12 to 18 months in steel, and if we can produce successful prototypes using both substrates, then I think we'll break the back of the de-risking, of the technology for the benefit of our shareholders. We'll have a very, very bright future. So it's a very good opportunity for incoming investors to enjoy the benefit of the investment in that, and I think it'll create a lot of wealth ultimately for our investors if we can translate that into productive business relationships in some of the countries around the world that we've mentioned tonight, including China, Turkey, UK, Australia and so forth.
Okay, thanks a lot, vielen Dank. Wir sind am Ende unserer Veranstaltung des Webcasts. Es konnten nicht alle Fragen beantworten werden. We wouldn't be able to answer our questions due to the time. Aber wir werden die Fragen sammeln und im Anschluss noch beantworten. We will collect those remaining questions and answer them afterwards. Ich darf mich ganz herzlich bedanken. Richard, your last words?
Oh, certainly. Listen, it's always a great pleasure to be able to communicate closely with our stakeholder base. I do appreciate the last month or two have raised the concerns of some of our investors. What you must understand that I'm also a significant investor in this technology, so our interests are very closely aligned, and I think the decisions we have taken and the outcomes that will emerge from these negotiations will be very positive, and I look forward to discussing these with stakeholders over the next quarter through ASX announcements and of course the relisting of our shares. And I hope everyone stays on board for the long-term benefit that we think we can deliver. Thanks very much.